Part 25. Due to man-made disease, Queen died. Moreover, once the two children go back to live for a few days, and there are things they send. Those officials who come to the door to bully will always think about it, right? I asked Chan Yanan to take care of it, although he was a villain who tended to be inflammatory. But it was precisely like this. Now that he had Xia Linxuan's favor, he would not take his words as a deaf ear. Thinking of this, Pu Qiutai couldn't help but sigh. And secretly said, "What's wrong with me now? How did it become so calculated?" However, after thinking about it, how can there be any clean people in this harem, the court, and the imperial city? His painstaking calculations are just for the sake of a better life for the prince's family in the previous dynasty, not for his own selfishness, but he can be called worthy of his heart. Therefore, it is also relieved. Xia Linxuan didn't have many twists and turns on his desk, and it didn't matter much, so he picked up 2 copies and discussed them with Pu Qiutai. And when he heard him say that the harem concubines didn't interfere in politics, His Majesty Emperor couldn't help laughing, pulled him to sit beside him, and said with a smile, "Okay. The people in the harem don't interfere in politics, but don't forget, you are still my courtier, and I didn't take down the official title of Imperial Academy to be edicted." Since he said so, Pu Qiutai naturally didn't care. In fact, he also wanted to know what the lives of the people were like now. Because the two discussed and studied with each other. The atmosphere was unprecedentedly warm. Xia Linxuan ate 2 pieces of naan, and also praised the good taste. Just when he was in a good mood, he suddenly heard the voice of Xiao Beiji outside. "Your Majesty, Mother Concubine Yan's palace sent someone over, saying that Mother has something important. Please move over to discuss." Xia Linxuan's face couldn't help but sink. And he snorted coldly. When did she have something important to do? He was about to refuse. He suddenly thought about it, and secretly said that it was related to some harem secrets. And he didn't want to come to Yunhai Palace to say? Well, if that's the case, it doesn't hurt to go there. Concubine Yan may not have been there for a long time anyway. I'll come back after talking about it. Thinking of this, he stood up and said to Pu Qiutai, "Okay, I'll go over and come to eat here in the evening. You can see and let your small kitchen be attentive and make a few good dishes for me to eat." After speaking, he reached out and gently pinched Pu Qiutai's handsome face. And he smiled and walked away. "My beloved concubine, what's the important thing that I want to move to you personally?" As soon as Xia Linxuan entered the door, he saw Li Qingyu, who was already dressed up and waiting, and a smile bloomed on her face. Just looking at his expression at this time, no one would believe that just a quarter of an hour ago, the emperor was still angry because of the other party's rudeness. The emperor only thinks about things, but he doesn't have any tenderness for his concubines. "You are so indifferent. How can the concubines be willing to help you?" Li Qingyu smiled like a flower, and after a glimmer bowed, she got up and came to Xia Linxuan, tidied up the dragon robe for him, and said coquettishly, "The emperor thinks about it yourself. How long have you not been here for the concubine?" "Well, I didn't come to my beloved concubine, nor did I go anywhere else. The queen is seriously ill. And the war in northern Xinjiang is tight. Where do I have the mind?" Xia Linxuan smiled and hugged Concubine Yan's slender waist, came to the Luohan couch and sat down. Li Qingyu took the opportunity to take one of the grapes on the plate and put it in his mouth. "The emperor came to deceive the concubines again, although you forgot the concubines here. But the concubines heard that you haven't forgotten the Yunhai Palace. The concubine only refused to accept it. But I don't know what good means. Concubine Wen had to coax the emperor to fall in love with him? Could it be that men are inherently more interesting than us women? Not necessarily, right? The emperor was not good at this in the past. As soon as he heard Li Qingyu mention Pu Qiutai, Xia Linxuan's smile narrowed a little, and he said lightly, "What does my beloved concubine mean when she mentions Qiutai? I haven't been to the Yunhai Palace much these days, what's the matter? Could it be that you're jealous? Don't forget that you are the concubine of the assistant sixth house, this jealousy. But by all means. How dare the concubine be jealous of concubine Wen?" Li Qingyu's heart froze, the color of jealousy in her eyes flashed, but the smile on her face became brighter and brighter. And she sat opposite Xia Linxuan and said with a smile, "If the concubine is really jealous, she won't invite the emperor to come over for this. In the final analysis, how about concubine Wen? The concubines don't care, but the concubines care about the emperor. The emperor is the heaven of the concubines, and the concubines naturally want to find ways to achieve the emperor's wishes. And the emperor feels that the concubines are right? Sure enough, it has something to do with Qiutai?" Xia Linxuan was puzzled in his heart, but his face was silent. He gently pinched Li Qingyu's face, and said with a smile, "What my beloved concubine said couldn't be more right. You are my woman, so naturally you have to think about me. But what do you know about concubine Wen's conspiracy? If you know, say it as soon as possible. Even if it is concubine Wen, I will never tolerate it." Li Qingyu smiled like a flower and said, "The emperor is serious. Concubine Wen is just a weak scholar, he can't carry his hands on his shoulders. What kind of conspiracy can he has? It's just that the concubine felt that although concubine Wen entered the harem, he never regarded the emperor as his own in his heart. Let alone the daimyo's court as his own country." "Oh, what do you mean by that?" Xia Linxuan smiled, and his sharp eyes shot on Li Qingyu's face, but seeing that the other party was not afraid, she reached out and took out a letter from her arms, and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, please take a look at concubine Wen's letter. If he regards the emperor as his own person and the famous country as his own country, how can he have such unfounded worries?" While speaking, she handed the letter over. Xia Linxuan took it, opened it and hurriedly browsed it. It turned out that the content of the letter was that Pu Qiutai tried his best to prevent his parents from entering Beijing. And there was a hint of worry in the words, only saying that his parents lived in seclusion in the south of the Jiangnan, away from disputes, and it was the best choice to be at ease. Xia Linxuan looked at it, and the anger in his heart jumped up, and secretly said, Qiutai, your vigilance against me has come to this point, and sure enough, as Concubine Yan said, you don't regard me as your family at all, and you don't regard this famous court as your own country at all. Otherwise, how can you say anything about strife and disturb people? How can you say that the feet of mud are deep? And what do you say it's too late to regret? Could it be that when your family moves to the capital, there will be constant disputes? Is it a deep dip in mud feet? Will it be too late to regret it one day? Angry in his heart, but his face was not revealing any form, Xia Linxuan put away the letter, and said with a smile, Qiutai is such a character. My beloved concubine doesn't have to be harsh. Where did this letter come from? Li Qingyu didn't hide it from Xia Linxuan, and told Xia Linxuan about the experience of getting this letter, and while saying it, she looked at Xia Linxuan's expression, and said with a smile, the concubine knows that the emperor loves concubine Wen, and she must be happy to let his family move over, but concubine Wen is also too worried, so the concubine thought about it. Or give this letter to the emperor, let the emperor decide. Xia Linxuan smiled and nodded, and said to Li Qingyu, yes, the concubine has a heart. Li Qingyu said with a smile, whether there is a heart or not, the concubine only knows that it is for the sake of the emperor, and it is a taboo to argue that this is a taboo thing. If it is someone else, Concubine Wen will not let his family enter Beijing, but he is happy to see it. Only the concubine thought that he was also pitiful. If he could have a family member who could reunite in the palace from time to time and enjoy the joy of family, wouldn't it be good? In the final analysis, the concubine is a solid-eyed person. The emperor doesn't blame the concubine, and the concubine is thankful. Xia Linxuan smiled. You did a very good job, how could I blame you? Well, I summoned a few courtiers. And now I think it's already here, so I'll go over first, and I'll be there tonight. Oh, forget it tonight, tomorrow night. I'll come to you and prepare something delicious. Li Qingyu was overjoyed, and seeing that Xia Linxuan had already strode away, she bowed behind him and said, Congratulations to the emperor. The emperor will remember to come on time tomorrow night, and the concubines will not disappoint the emperor. When Xia Linxuan was gone, Ruohong stepped forward and said, Mother. The slave doesn't understand. Why did you hand over the letter to the emperor at this time? Why not wait and see? Li Qingyu looked at the direction Xia Linxuan left, smiled coldly, shook her head and said, Fool. Wait a little longer? How long will it take? When is the emperor completely devoted to that slut? At that time, let alone a mere letter, even if it is a big thing, I am afraid that it will have to cover up the past. It is at this time that the best time to plant a thorn in the emperor's heart with this letter. Time will pass slowly, and this thorn will slowly grow, and when the emperor can't stand it anymore, the day when it finally breaks out for some reason, it is a good opportunity to get rid of this slut. Speaking of this, she looked at Ruohong and smiled. You did a good job this time. I see that you are also a clever person. From now on, you will serve me closely. It just so happens that I also need such a person, from now on. You are the big palace maid in my palace. Before the words fell, Ruohong had already knelt down and cried with joy. Li Qingyu's words were in his heart. While Xia Linxuan returned to the imperial study, and then there was a sound of ping-pong, and everything that could be smashed in the imperial study was smashed. Xiao Beiji was guarding the door in a panic, not knowing what was going on. The emperor didn't let him in, so he didn't dare to move. After a long time, he heard no sound inside. When he was about to take a look, he heard Xia Linxuan calling him in the house. Your Majesty. Xiao Beiji was worried about entering the house, and heard Xia Linxuan say lightly, Go and tell Chan Yanan that Pu Tai's family is going to move to the capital. And I ordered him to notify the magistrate and give full assistance to make sure that the Pu family moves here as soon as possible. Also, government minister of the propaganda ministry came to see me. And I wanted to discuss with him about building a house for the Pu family. Xiao Beiji's heart jumped, and he secretly said, Master Pu is self-defeating now. This time. Even if his family changes their minds, I'm afraid that the emperor will give an order to force them to move in. Master Pu is so indifferent, this plan to sow discord in your lifetime. You don't know if you can use it, it's really harmful to others and not to yourself. 3 days passed in a blink of an eye. Pu Qiutai didn't know anything about Xia Linxuan's intention to let his parents enter Beijing, and only taught Zhu Shanyan and Zhu Mingfang 2 subsets of scriptures and history, poetry and songs every day. Furong and Luliu and others occasionally talked about the queen's illness. And he didn't care about the concubines in the palace who went to Taining Palace every day to explore the disease. If Furong urged, he said lightly, I don't know the queen. And I don't have a relationship, at this time. The Taining Palace is full of people, what kind of excitement am I going to make? Do you really go to visit the Queen Mother? I'm afraid it's what you're going to do to see the news, right? I don't have any plans, what am I going to do with it? As soon as he said this, Furong and the others couldn't do anything about it. knowing that although this master is in the palace now, he actually has no good impression of the daimyo dynasty and the emperor. Pu Qiutai has only one homeland in his heart from beginning to end. Although he also used the emperor to achieve some of his own goals, such as the Baishan case, such as the family of the prince of the previous dynasty. However, isn't that a trap set up by the emperor to persecute him? Therefore, although several people were anxious about Pu Qiutai's indifferent attitude, they had nothing to say. On the morning of the fourth day, Pu Qiutai packed up and ordered someone to send Zhu Shanyan and Zhu Mingfang out. He was going to leave the palace together, but the queen was not good these days. So Xia Linxuan was also in a bad mood, knowing that he would definitely touch the nail when he went to talk at this time, so he had to give up. Seeing the carriage driving out of the palace gate, he and Farong, Yulan and others walked back. Before they arrived at the Yunhai Palace, he saw the Liulu looking anxiously outside the door, and when he saw them coming back, she stepped forward and said hurriedly, "Mother, the queen is not good. Now the emperor has passed, and the palace mothers have also passed. You go over quickly. No matter what you think in your heart, you really can't be there at this time." Pu Qiutai thought of the graceful and luxurious woman, sighed in his heart, nodded, and turned around with Farong, Yulan, and went straight to Tai Ning Palace. At this time, in the Tai Ning Palace, the concubines were waiting quietly in the outer hall, because the emperor was inside, so they didn't hear a cough. And there were two who couldn't hold their breath. Although they knew that they couldn't see anything, they still couldn't help but look up at the inner hall with their necks stretched. "Queen, if you insist on insisting, Qingyun is already on his way back to Beijing. His defeat of northern Hungary this time is really a great achievement. Don't you want to wait and see his infinite scenery?" Next to the bed in the inner hall, Xia Linxuan sat beside the queen, gently holding her hand to encourage. Although he doesn't have the same love for this woman as he does for Pu Qiutai. However, thinking that the queen is in charge of the harem, she has always been virtuous and kind. Even if he has no love for her, he also has respect and husband and wife affection. How can he not be sad for a while? "Your Majesty, concubine, I'm afraid I can't wait. Qingyun is back. Today is thanks to the emperor. Take courage." The queen looked at this husband quietly, although she knew that the other party only had husband and wife love for herself. But she was also satisfied. This is the supreme man in the world, at least, since she married him, he has always trusted and respected her. Compared to the queens who were abolished or killed in the previous dynasty, she was lucky. "Queen, don't say that." Xia Linxuan held the queen's hand and suddenly tightened. "You should take care of your illness. Your Majesty, it's too late, please let the concubines." Let the concubine finish her words. The queen's eyes flashed with brilliance, and her voice was a little louder, so Xia Linxuan knew that the general trend was gone, and he couldn't help but feel a pain in his heart, nodded gloomily, and said sadly, "You say." "I listen. Your Majesty, although Qingyun is a general, what can I do? The temperament is too flamboyant. He returned to Beijing in triumph, and the emperor could not. The reward is too much, and it should be strict discipline. The concubine's mother died early, and my father was old. Only such a younger brother is the hope of the family's future." The body of the partial concubine is not angry, and from then on, this brother can only be entrusted to the emperor. "I hope you will read it in You and Me, and you will be in it. For his brother-in-law's sake, teach him to be a talent." "I will, you can rest assured. I finally have such a world-famous general, I will never let him grow crooked." The queen's family has always known how to advance and retreat, and I am in one day, to ensure that they are glorious and rich for a day. That's what the queen wanted, and now that she heard it, She showed a smile on her face, nodded slightly, and took a few quick breaths before she muttered again, also, the emperor. Concubines. The concubines have been able to get to this day. Not because of illness, the specific situation. The emperor asked the doctor recommended by Qingyun, and he could know. The emperor, the harem is sinister. And now the emperor has someone he loves, so he can't. You can't ignore it as you did before. Think more about 3 points, lest you. I can't regret it. What do you mean? Xia Linxuan was startled. He stared at the queen and said in a deep voice, could it be that your illness is not a natural disaster, but a man-made? Who is so bold? Your Majesty. The queen grabbed Xia Linxuan's hand, gasped for a few breaths, she shook her head and muttered, the concubine is no longer able to return to the sky. If you track it down at this time, what can you find? Nothing more than, it's just innocent, and you have the courage to do this. How could the emperor find out? Concubines. It's just a wake-up call for the emperor. Master Pu. Master Pu is a poor man. If the emperor loves him, be careful. Protect him thoroughly. Queen. Xia Linxuan was really moved. A little moisture appeared in the corners of his eyes. Before the queen died, she still remembered Pu Qiutai. This is naturally not because she has any feelings for Pu Qiutai, but because she is worried about him. She is afraid that he will become a lonely person in a high place in the future. Your Majesty. The concubine has one last request. Seeing Xia Linxuan's expression, the queen was completely relieved. It was worth it to exchange her life for the murderer behind the scenes, for the uneasy sleep in the future, for the emperor's touching and that trace of affection, and for the prosperity and glory of the family. You say, seeing that the queen's anger is like a gossamer like gold paper, it is obvious that the limit has arrived. Xia Linxuan's tears finally fell. I can still exchange him for a tear when I die. The queen suddenly felt infinite sadness in her heart, but she couldn't care about anything else at the moment. Her life was only in the middle of nowhere, and if she couldn't explain the last thing in her heart, she would really be blind. Your Majesty, the prince is young, and the concubines have been sick all these years. After all, he has neglected discipline, so that his temperament is a little violent. The prince is the prince of a country, and it is related to the number of the famous country, and the concubines begged the emperor to send him to the, after the death of the concubine, sent to Lord Pu to raise, except for him and the emperor, in this harem, there is no concubine who can rest assured that the prince is entrusted. Your Majesty. I beg you to grant this last request of your concubines. Although the crown prince is not born to the queen, you have a fist and heart for him, and you have a loving mother's affection. I am here. Thank you. Xia Linxuan nodded solemnly, and stretched out his hand to caress the queen's face. Don't worry, I will hand him over to Qiutai to raise. And Qiutai will definitely raise a magnificent monarch for my name. In this way, the concubine has no worries, and the concubine is just reluctant. I can't bear to. The emperor and the crown prince. The queen burst into tears, and stretched out her hand as if to caress her husband, who was guarding the bedside, but she fell weakly halfway. Daimyo Yon Zheng 4 years, queen died.